They come with the speed and are open 24/7 on their smartphones. And I'm not just talking about the millennials, but the general customers are opting for neobanks too. This session will offer a 360 perspective on how neobanks are shaping up in India and globally. How can they make a difference in Bharat and India? That's a major difference. So to find solution to these pertaining issues, we have Amol Dete, editor ETBFSI, to ask the right questions with our panelist.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to ETBFSI Converge. We are going to discuss the future of neobanks, and I have with me Ms. Benedict Nolan, Head BIS Innovation Hub, Hong Kong Center. Benedict, welcome on the show.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Pleasure to have you here. And I would like you to learn more about the future of neobanks and the operation models of the neobanks. In last couple of years, obviously, the Monzo and so many other models we have been discussing about, and everybody says that the future of the banks is a neobanks. So, what do you see the future of neobanks? Why is the future of neo? Why is the banking? Why is the new bank the future for the bankings? How would you like to explain that?
So I think it seems like people are using the words neobank sometimes a little bit narrow and sometimes broader. And I personally prefer to look at the broader context of big tech, fintech, and neobanks, if you don't mind. But before I start, I need to point out, as per process, that these are just my views and not the views of the BIS. So sorry, I have to do that for good protocol. Okay. In essence, let's see, my interest in this topic goes back to around 2014, actually, and in fact, my interest started with the most outlier of the tech innovations in finance, which was the whole crypto sector. Around 2014, I noticed that this new sector was coming along. I then started looking more broadly into this, and I noticed that there was this phenomenon that people started calling fintech. Now, at the time, I decided then to launch a more extensive, you could say, research effort into this. And I can tell you at the time, people would even question me what fintech was. They would say it's not a defined term, so why are we looking into it? Obviously, 4 years onward, you can see even 4 years onward that things have changed very materially. So my viewpoint in terms of the way you can separate these is in three broad buckets: the big techs, the fintechs, and the blockchain related companies / cryptos. And I published on that actually in 2017, and I did put them into those buckets. So in the big tech category, you got primarily actually the Chinese groups, Tencent and Ant. And they stand out because they're just very, very large, and they go into all areas of finance. The fintechs, on the other hand, tend to be a little bit more specialized, like focused on a specific topic. So you could say the neobanks specifically, if you need to look at the term very narrowly, so like the Monzos you've mentioned, are the move-ins, right? They fall into that second category, which are the fintechs. So these are focused models. You have crowdfunding, peer-to-peer lending, investment, insurance, and bank more generally. So that's a second group. And then the third group, as said, is anything to do with blockchain, which really was born from an unregulated context and continues to operate up until today, largely unregulated. So to me, these are very different things.
Very interesting perspective, and thanks for giving that overall perspective about the neobanks and the fintech, fintech. But I would like to maybe understand more in detail, why do we need neobanks, or what is the difference that neobanks will make?
Again, I'm going to answer to you for across the buckets, because I think like a neobank in and of itself doesn't make much of a difference.
Right.
But I think if you take all these categories together, so big tech, fintech, and crypto, then you see a picture of incredible change that has happened over 4 years, and in fact that will just accelerate in the next 10 years, right? So I think, if, as I said, if you look narrowly at just one of these business models, they haven't made a big change. If you add them up and you see how they're changing the competitive landscape for banking, how they're kind of, to a certain extent, chipping away at the different aspects of a bank, then you know that there's something pretty fundamental on their way. So as said, I published on this topic back in 2017, and the position taken at the time was that these changes taken together were very material, whereas individually they might not be. So take now a neobank as an example. So far you could say the neobanks have not made a material change. Extent, they mostly improved UX user experience, right, in terms of onboarding and in terms of managing your account. Secondly, retail business specifically is an extremely sticky business. Is once people have a retail account, I mean, think about yourself. I have a retail account. I've opened also a virtual bank account. That's a so-called neobank. In Hong Kong, we call them the virtual banks. But obviously, banking, keep in mind, among all finance, is the one where the core function is the safekeeping of people's most precious asset, right? Their savings are one of their most precious assets. So consequently, what you see is that these neobanks mostly are an improved user experience, but they have a hard time drawing away all the retail customers from standing banks. So instead, what happens is they attract a new generation of customers. Let's say my children, right? They're highly likely going to want a neobank and not a bank that is online with a very good user interface, and probably the things that they want in the future, because there are many other things that this new generation wants that are aligned typically with the mega trends that we see in the world. They might, for example, want sustainable investment. They might want to see how much their carbon footprint is. They might want to do investment in democratized fashion in $1 as opposed to in 10,000 US dollars. And they might even want to pay in digital currencies in the future. Now, they might be state-backed digital currencies like central bank digital currencies, but the point is they might want to see all of that. They might want to see essentially the bank being the same as their iPhone, right? Because their iPhone is their friend. That's what they do all day round. Certainly my ones, I can't keep them off their iPhone. And so they're going to want to see a bank that functions that way with the services that they want. Oftentimes that means these are frankly democratized services. What I mean is they are services no longer catering only for the very rich or rich, but also for the people that needed to be financially included and that couldn't. And you could even say teenagers fall in that category, because teenagers were not financially included, right? You couldn't get a bank account. With the neobanks, you actually start being able to do that, for example. And same with investment. There are investment apps, maybe not in India, but in other parts of the world, like America, that are specifically focused on that younger generation. It is a form of supervised investment where the parent can intervene or stop, but where that child or that teenager builds experience. So as said, I see the neobanks in that category. I see them as, let's say, a significant improvement of the user experience. However, it's not going to draw the old clientele away from their trusted retail bank, but it's going to draw a new clientele that over a period of 10 to 20 years will accumulate, you could say, in a new customer proposition and a solid outcome. Now, maybe one more thing to add is some of these neobanks grow up in banks. So I used to work for Standard Chartered, and it created the virtual bank called Mox in Hong Kong. There's also potential that virtual banks that are born out of a bank actually end up changing how the bank does things. So, for example, in the case of Standard Chartered, the Mox interface is very, very good, right? And it's very savvy. For example, you can see your your acquisition of interest by the day. So I can see if today I got $1 Hong Kong, right? That's not possible on your standard bank account. The other thing is the onboarding experience is in 3 minutes. That's not possible on a traditional bank account. So these things may drive positive change within the group. So anyway, that's specific to the neobanks.
Okay, very well said. In fact, two, three important points, and I could copy that. I can understand, that the focus of the neobank is specifically on the young people like you and me, considering the economy right now. But is that the focus specifically of the neobanks, and they will not look at the other population? Is that going to be the only focused area for neobanks? And they have decided, okay, this is what we are going to look at?
Well, I would say everywhere in life, right? And that's not unique to financial services. It's actually always better to focus on an underserved segment, right? To focus on the served segment is you're making your life hard, right? Because you got to do two things. One, find them, and two, draw them away. Whereas in the case where you go for the green field, so to say, or the white space, right? Then you essentially have only that first thing to do, right? Is to find it and then target it. So, I mean, let's go back to the big techs, the Chinese big techs, both Tencent and Ant, so the two groups, they have fully focused on white space. But I would say they've done an additional thing, is they've not only found the white space, they have increased the white space. By making offerings that you wouldn't have imagined that white space even needed, right? So you could say all these bundled offerings, including that are so, frankly, that are data friendly, meaning that the company can acquire a lot of data with it, and that's very useful for the rest of the business. All of that is pretty much extension of the white space, in my view. So there were underserved people, but even those people didn't know what they needed. And it's a little bit like the iPhone, right? Because if you remember, Steve Jobs actually did say that. He said, you have to give it to people because they may not know what they can use or what they need. I don't remember his exact quotation, but that's where things are successful. And you could say Amazon is playing in that same range, right? It's offering things that people have not imagined that they actually need. So it's two things: underserved or not served or white space, plus things that people didn't think they need. So I gave you an example, right? If a bank could show to me my carbon footprint, I would be interested in that. But today, no bank is offering that. I don't even know a neobank who's offering that. But the neobank that starts offering that may have an advantage, right? Depending on whether the new generation feels that that's a useful thing.
So in India also the trend of neobanks is increasing or on the rise, Benedict, though there are no clear regulations. But what I have seen globally is, if I look at the banks like N26 or, Oak North or Monzo or Revolt, or even the much talked bank was Zinja from Australia, what you can say, they rose really fast. In fact, they grabbed the market really well, but there is, some stop, then they started going slow. So if I look at Zinja now, it was one of the phenomenal bank, but now they're going really slow, and I can see a lot of challenges over there. So how do you see, the growth of the neobanks in post-pandemic era?
Again, that's why I try to look at fintech as a broader phenomenon than just the neobanks, right? So maybe to go back one step, a neobank is a bank, right? So if you really look at it only as the one holding the license that is called the banking license, right? If we define neobank narrowly to being only those that hold the banking license, then what you have to keep in mind is you're in the highest regulated field, right? Because of the fact of what I said before, is that a bank is meant to safekeep people's most precious savings, Consequently, it's also the highest regulated field, which then explains why that phenomenon you see is a couple of things, actually, an additional phenomenon. One, it's not cheap to set one up because you actually need a lot of investment. And secondly, core banking is still not really widely available in cloud native format. So there's a lot of modification you need to do, a lot of work, and it costs a lot of money. So, and then nevertheless, initially, as you said, it can grow pretty fast, but it's not to be excluded, as you said, that there is a certain plateau to it, right? So I'm not, in a sense, surprised by what you are experiencing in India. And that's why I said I like to look at the benefits of technology, or the opportunities that fintechs have in a much broader context.
I will have one or two more questions on the fintechs, but before moving to that, how are regulators looking at neobanks? I know at one side they have to also protect the innovation, but other side their major worry is to protect the investors and the customers, right? So how are regulators actually trying to deal with the neobanks?
Yeah, so in Hong Kong, we're one of the first markets, I think, to have what we call virtual bank regime. And so the HKMA has given out 8 licenses to virtual banks. And the whole point is they are banks, as I said to you, right? So they are subject to the whole of the banking ordinance and the relevant regulations, which is highly intense, as you know. Including on the risk management side, and you know, all the governance you need around that. So the only relaxation is that you don't need to have branches, right? Because in the normal setting of a bank ordinance, you needed to have branches. Well, you don't need that, and in fact, you're not even allowed to have that in the virtual bank regulation. But for the rest, regulators in Hong Kong look at them the same as a bank. So they need to have the same security, and I think the security is the most important thing, because as I mentioned before, a neobank is typically cloud native. What that means is it's all built on cloud. Unlike a incumbent bank, there's not many incumbent banks that are built on cloud. None is built on cloud because cloud didn't exist. But secondly, even very few have managed so far to successfully migrate to cloud, right, across the business, because it's not easy to migrate a big standing business. So neobanks are different in that they're all on the cloud, but it also means you have the need for quite intense cybersecurity focus. So, and that is the key, really, focus, regulatory focus there, ICS.
Okay, yes, I mean, and that should be, in fact, cybersecurity is one of the very, very crucial thing. In fact, that is what is, giving a banker a sleepless night, even in this pandemic as well. Okay, considering all these, innovations that is happening specifically in the neobanks era, obviously fintechs are rising also really high in terms of innovation. Big techs are also are ready to take the big pie of the financial institutions. What kind of major innovations that you see in the space of finance going ahead, or specifically after the post-pandemic, considering fintechs are going high, big techs are going high, neobanks are also expanding?
Yeah, so sorry, I forgot to answer your COVID question before, but COVID very clearly has kept us all at home, right? So we're kind of stuck wherever we are. And consequently, I think there's 2 phenomena really happening. One is that people definitely want a better user interface, but 2, much more interestingly, they have a lot of time to play around with stuff. So if you look at the US stock markets, and I'm not speaking here based on research, but only based on news reading, it's been rising high, as you know, right? And part of it is the entrance of this new generation there, of these youngsters who've discovered Robinhood in specific, which is one of the fintechs. And Robinhood, actually, I did cover Robinhood back in the research in 2016. And it's kind of interesting to see that 4 years on, they get this massive inflow as a result of COVID. That's just one example. I think any of the RegTechs that are offering non-face-to-face onboarding and that were already established, let's say they had a couple of virtual bank or neobank customers, as you say, or a lot of other customers, these type of firms are seeing very high demand because, as said, the interfaces used by the older banks are not as good as those of the neobanks. So the older banks now go like, look, people can't come to my branch to open an account. I need a better interface. So they're going to look at the learnings. So in Hong Kong, we see that a lot. We see them look at the learnings that they see these virtual banks adopt new systems and they go like, we might as well start thinking about this ourselves. Now, one thing to add though for the banks is they do have internet interfaces, right? At least in Hong Kong, we've had it for a long time and it's pretty good. It's not as savvy as a neobank. It's not as pretty, but it works. And we also have faster payment system, which is pretty instant. So if I make a transfer in Hong Kong, instantly it arrives with another person.
Oh, that was too good, Benedict. And before I wrap up, allow me to ask one more question, which is my last question. Broad question. How do you see the future of banking?
So I think maybe to bring us back to what is the use of all these fintechs, right? So to me, it's an evolutionary matter, right? Evolution happens everywhere. We know that, right? Including in our species, right? According to Darwin. And I think, therefore, this is an evolutionary matter. So what I think the techs, all of these that I've mentioned, the big techs, the fintechs, the crypto companies that are ultimately going to lead to maybe even CBDCs, central bank digital currencies, what they're doing is they're really putting pressure on everybody to be their best, you see, is to improve their interfaces, to improve their offering, and in particular to improve the customer experience. And I think this is something that every company that has been operating for a long time can learn, is it sometimes loses touch with what the customer needs. And then comes a new entrant, and that new entrant is showing what the customer needs. And what the customer normally needs is something easy to use, accessible, and low cost, right? And let's face it, that's not what's always being offered. And every of these techs is targeting exactly that combination that I've set out. Something better, something easily accessible, and lowering the cost. And to go back to your question on neobanks, is neobanks do think that they can operate on the longer term at lower cost, and therefore, can generate better returns for their customers. But we're maybe too early to be at that outcome.
Appreciate your views, Benedict. Very, very meaningful, in fact. Thank you so much for sharing your views on at BFSI Converge. Thank you so much for taking part at ETBFSI Converge.
Feel free to visit our partner booth for any information on such relevant topic. So no harm in dropping by and saying hi to our experts. I'm sure the visit will be useful and they will be happy to connect with you. So do share your feedback about the session at the end, and you can interact with us on social media using the hashtag ETBFSI Converge.